Welcome everybody. I'm Shanti Gonzalez. I'm the Candidate Recruitment and Training Manager for the League of Conservation Voters. And we all are very lucky today to have with us Martin Diego Garcia, who will introduce himself. But I was trained as a candidate. So and I was successful in my campaign. So you're being trained by one of the best today. Martin, you want to say a little bit about yourself?
Thank you. Thank you. I'm super excited to be here with Shanti and with all of you, talking about something that I love to do and I do randomly just on my personal time, is recruiting candidates. So my name is Martin Diego Garcia, and I am a vice president over the campaign workshop, but have been able to work in the LGBTQ space, not Latinx space, in the women's space, in a number of different spaces, thinking through and being able to intentionally recruit for candidates who are not very often asked to be in positions of power. So I'm excited that you all are joining us for this conversation this morning, afternoon, depending on where you're coming from.
Yeah. And we are doing this as part of Latinx Advocacy Week, which is a project of the Hispanic Access Foundation. So really glad we can be part of this. You all probably know that Latinx folks are underrepresented at pretty much every level of government, from school boards all the way on up to the US presidency. So someday we're going to have a Latinx US president, I'm sure of it. Yeah, so we're really happy to be part of this effort. And I also just want to acknowledge Green Latinos, who also helped us to get the word out about this. And of course, the campaign workshop reached out to your guys' list. And so really appreciate the different efforts, and also Hispanic Access Foundation to get the word out about this. So today we just want to talk about why representation matters in elected office, share some of the basics of candidate recruitment. We want to share some stories. We want you all to also share some stories about successful candidate recruitment. And then we want to leave about 20 minutes at the end for questions. So that's what we're trying to do today. And we can go to the next slide. And talk about, well, who is LCV Education Fund? So we work to turn environmental values into state, local, and national priorities, working with state affiliates, some of whom are on with us today. We advocate for strong environmental protections. We organize communities to speak up for their environmental values. And we engage people in the democratic process. So that means registering new people to vote, getting people out to vote, getting them to participate in census, all that good stuff. Martin, you want to talk about the campaign workshop?
Absolutely. So the campaign workshop was founded in 2009. So we have been around for a little while now, and we are a progressive consulting firm. As you see on the slide here, we specialize in being a thought partner with groups and organizations, both in the advocacy and in the electoral space, in thinking through how do you get the most bang for your buck. And we bring in a vast variety of experiences, from candidate campaigns to independent expenditures to organizational capacity building, and really like to be a true thought partner with the groups and organizations that we work with. We've worked with a number of folks in the environmental space, a number of folks in the Latinx space. So if you have questions outside of this, that any of these things strike your fancy, by all means, please reach out to me.
Great. We can go to the next slide here. So this is probably really obvious, but it's worth talking about. Why does representation matter? Why does it matter who's serving in elected office? Why does it matter who's serving in important cabinet positions, who the president is? And I just wanted to point out that our new Secretary of the Interior, Deb Haaland, before she was elected to Congress, nobody was talking about, well, I shouldn't say that. It wasn't part of the national agenda to be talking about violence against women, particularly Indigenous women, Native women. And my own story about representation is that I would not be working for the League of Conservation Voters today if not for AOC, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's congressional campaign, because I had always, I cared about the planet, I recycled, I even owned an electric car, but I never thought of myself as an environmentalist, and I never thought about working for an environmental organization until I saw, somebody who looked, somewhat like me, talking about the environment in a different way that was really centering people, right? And the way that people are being impacted by climate change, and the way that communities are experiencing environmental racism and injustice, because whenever I thought about environmentalists before, I thought, they're talking about salmon or trees, and those things are important, but like, that those aren't the kinds of things that are happening in my community, right? And so it really matters, right? It matters to see some people who look like us and share our experiences in these roles, because if you see it, then you can be it, right? So also, right, different leaders bring different agendas, right? We saw this with Deb Haaland. The things that she wanted to talk about and the people she wanted to center were very different from the agenda that existed before her election. And then basic fairness, right? White men hold 4 times as much political power as others in this country because they only represent 31% of the population, but they hold more than twice that in the terms of the number of elected positions. And women, we have a long way to go to reach parity in the US Congress and in state legislatures. And so is this why we don't have universal paid leave, family leave? Is this why we don't have affordable health, childcare and universal health care, right? We can go to the next slide. And I think this one is for you, Martin.
Absolutely. So we as organizations get a lot out of recruiting candidates. And so it is helpful for us to be intentional and strategic as we think through how to recruit candidates. The reasons why are because when we have champions in legislative positions, as Shanti just mentioned, different perspectives are introduced. We make sure that we also have an advocate and a champion within the legislatures that we're working in, whether it's at the municipal level, the federal level, or the state level. And it leads to either really big policy wins or at least continuing to move the needle forward, right? It allows us to have folks, whether it's the only LGBTQ person in the state legislature, right? Or you have a caucus of environmental folks within a state legislature. It helps you to build that conversation and move policy and legislation that is part of your all's mission and goals and agendas. We know that we have relationships with these folks. So hopefully they will be relatively loyal to us when we go to them with an ask about policy or an agenda or a constituency meeting, et cetera, to ensure that they have all the information they need, but we are also then bringing our folks to the table to have conversations with them as well to ensure that all of our perspectives are being considered. Which also leads to brand loyalty or to brand building, right? For us as organizations, we want to show that we have power and influence in the political space. So when we're able to recruit a particular candidate and ensure that they get elected to office and support them when they are in office, it can really raise the brand and the political influence of your group or your organization. I used to work at the LGBTQ Victory Fund and Institute, and one of the candidates that we recently trained and got elected was Danica Rome out in Virginia, who became the first trans woman elected to a state legislature. There were some couple of others before that, but she was the one who stayed and has been and defeated a pretty anti-LGBTQ Republican legislator. And she ran on transit issues and has continued to raise the profile of not only her, but of the Victory Fund and Institute in terms of how they supported her throughout her campaign and the resources they offered her. And she went on to do a number of legislative pieces, particularly under the pandemic. One that I think is really just amazing is she had a constituent within her district who had a child who had cancer. And the rules with the provided meals through the schools was only allowing parents to pick up meals if they had their student or child with them. So she created legislation that allowed parents to go to these schools to pick up for children who were not able to go to school to get those meals. And that ended up becoming national policy across a number of different states. And so she's not doing that as a trans woman, right? She's doing that as a really good legislator, and it helps change sort of hearts and minds and perspectives of who can have power and who can get work done and how folks see other people in these positions of power. So I think why we do this is really important to change and include and diversify the number of perspectives we have in these levels of offices.
So what makes a good candidate? Some of you are coming from a community organizing background. So I would just argue, and I'm biased because I came as community labor organizing background before I ran for office. I forgot to mention I serve on the school board in Oakland, California. which is how I met a couple people who are on today. But, you know, similar to organizing, a campaign is a bunch of asks, right? It's a bunch of asks for people to invest in your campaign and donate, can you contribute to your campaign? It's asks for people to vote for you. It's asks for them to volunteer for you. So it's a bunch of asks. And the main thing that you need as a candidate is a willingness to make those asks. It helps if you come with humility and come in a listening stance, right, to your community, because it's just, you know, that's people can tell that you care if you listen, right, and that you're open to their ideas and their thoughts and their visions for their community, for the community, right. It helps if you have a big network, and so if you're coming from, you know, people, you know, if you've come out of a faith community, a labor, you know, community, it helps to have that big network behind you. And it also helps if you have a base that's going to hold you accountable once you get elected, because that's who's going to keep calling you back to the reasons that you wanted to run. And just to note that a good candidate is not always a good elected official. Just because somebody's willing to do the work, you know, to knock on doors and kiss babies and all that stuff does not mean that they're going to show up the way that we want them to show up as an elected official. So I don't know, Martina, if you want to chime in on this slide about anything else that makes a good candidate.
I was going to say, and very often vice versa. Does a good elected not usually make a good candidate, right? So somebody who is wanting to be like elbows deep into policy and wonkland, right, may not be somebody who is super charismatic and can really like bring and move folks to action, right? But it's not to say that they don't need the help, and those are the folks we actually do want in these political offices doing the work for us. But that's all I had to add there.
Great. We can go to the next slide. And so what is persuasive to potential candidates? I mentioned that I'm on the school board here in Oakland, and was able to recruit a friend to run for my school board. But it really helped for him that it wasn't just me who was asking him to run. There were several people that he knew and who cared about him, that were invested in his success. And so I think if it had just been me, I don't know if that would have been persuasive to him, but there was several of us who had worked with him through various community organizing efforts over the years, who trusted him really and trusted his leadership, and several people who asked him to run. And so I think that was really compelling for him. You know, when we can support them once elected, here in Oakland, I have founded something called the Progressive Education Leaders Network, with another school board colleague, from Albany Unified. And that way we're providing training and support to people once they get elected. I think one of our big issues, you know, in the progressive space, the environmental space, is we, you know, even if we do get somebody really good elected, it's usually like, great, good luck, you know, let's see you in 4 years, right? And so that is just not really serving us well, right? So how can we support people once they are elected to be effective? And I think some of you know that for the first time this year, LCV offered a governance training through the Progressive Governance Academy with Repower to our CVM endorsed candidates. We're going to keep doing that, but as a first time, right? And so we need to figure out how do we support people once they get elected. And then, you know, helping them, you know, come up with a clear vision of what would be possible if they were elected. Sometimes it's hard to imagine what could really change in your community. But if they have a clear vision and you help them, you know, envision what would it look like if you were elected, that can help. And then also just helping them, right? Help them raise money, help them get endorsements, help them with field. You know, I was out there knocking doors for Sam. I definitely introduced him to donors. I tried to help him get connected to endorsers. So Martina, anything else on this one?
No, well, last one thing. I mean, if you as an organization don't offer that elected official sort of support or mentoring, just figure out who in your network does, right? So that you're at least connecting them to whatever that support looks like. Next. Oh,
I think this one is you, Martina.
This is me. So know that it takes a while, right? If you haven't been an organization who has been intentionally doing this and building relationship in this way, it may take some time for you to sort of find your groove. So start as early as possible, right? Give yourself enough time to identify those key targeted spaces where you need candidates. Give yourself some time to meet with those folks on the ground and build that trust and that authenticity with them, because that's where it's going to lead to more successful folks who are going to trust you all and feel like you all have their back and are able to support them, to have them run for office. But know that this is a long-term type of work that you will be engaging in. And remember, these are people first, right? We may be like, oh, we don't have a environmental champion in this city council or in this state legislator or wherever, right? And you're just sifting through all of these people to be like, oh, you would be a great fit. And you're sort of thinking them as like a piece of paper or as a resume. And you really need to think about them as a person first and figure out what is it that they need in order to feel comfortable running for office. We, when I was at the LGBTQ Victory Fund, we trained a woman by the name of Simone Bell. And she came to the training not actually thinking she was going to run for office. She was just a local advocate who wanted to support other candidates who were running for office. She was a lesbian Black woman. And through that training and realizing the amount of support that she could get and that she saw and that she needed, and we were able to walk her through what it looked like to actually run and be very, to this last bullet point, be very honest about what the demands of a campaign life look like and what the demands of being an elected official look like, and get her to a place where she felt comfortable. She then ran a phenomenal campaign and became the first Black lesbian elected to a state legislature in the nation. And at the time was probably only a handful of out lesbians who were serving in public office. And so you want to really be intentional about what is it that each individual person you are targeting needs in order to feel comfortable, in order to know that they're not out there alone, right? That they actually do have a team of support behind them. And then they need to be asked, right? Emily Bliss always says, right, a woman needs to be asked anywhere between 7 and 10 times before she even starts to consider saying yes, right? So what does it mean for folks who are who are not represented or don't see themselves in these positions, to again envision that is a possibility, and being specific with them about what does their potential path to victory mean for them. And if for all intents and purposes they can't do it right now, loop them in to start helping recruit other folks. Next slide. Candidates, I mean, it is helpful for them to have a pretty stable life. Excuse me. And whatever that means for them, right? We all don't come from the picture perfect family, white picket fence, right? Like 2.5 kids and a dog, right? But what does it mean for them to be in a stable position in their life, whether that's work-wise or family-wise or chosen family-wise, right? Financially or otherwise, to feel like they can be successful, right? We have had candidates who have come out of a very messy, very public divorce, right? Where there were childhood custody battles that were out in the public, who then got into a place where they felt comfortable and their life was back on track and stable for what it meant for them, and able to run a successful campaign, right? But running a campaign is difficult and hard, and it takes a lot of time. And so having somebody who comes in with multiple things that they are dealing with on multiple fronts may not allow them the time to hone in and focus the time and effort that they need to run a successful campaign. For you all need to do your homework, right? Look at the district. Who's run before? Who's the incumbent? Is it an open seat? How much was spent last time? Right? How much information can you gather so that you're able to better answer their questions as they have them, whether they're running for school board or whether they're running for Congress, right? What does it look like for them to do that? Because I'm sure they're going to have questions, particularly if they've actually never thought about running for office before. So do your homework and figure out what that looks like so that you're building a bench and looking at down ballot races too. Very often, and I have the pleasure of training a number of folks who have the dream and the intention and the motivation to run for office. And a lot of the times they come in thinking, well, I want to go to Congress. Well, I want to be in the US Capitol. And very often it's going to take some time for them to get there, which isn't a bad thing. But we try to gear them to, hey, well, let's look at another legislative body that is similar to Congress, so we can get some experience under your belt, build up your donor network, build up your relationships, right? So that by the time you do run for Congress, we can raise that we can build that infrastructure and raise that type of money. Talk to as many people as possible. I'll tell one quick story here. I had a colleague when I was working at Repower who used to tell this story in a training, and I always loved it. And it was, she used to work at a labor organization. And they used to have these monthly meetings where they would have memberships come in to one of their membership meetings, and they weren't getting a lot of participation. So one of the members asked if she could take over the lunch, providing the lunch for the meeting. And they were serving like they would just order pizzas and it was fine. So she ended up figuring out how much budget they had and organized better lunches for the meeting, which increased participation. So one of the union members noticed it and was like, hey, you should think about running for the exec board. So she ran for secretary and she won. A couple years later, she was the president of her exec board. A couple years later, she actually ran for public office and became a state legislator in the state of Minnesota. And so you just never know where you're going to find these folks. So you always want to keep your eye out for who are those folks who are self-selecting in some way, and showing that type of leadership and initiative, because it can be anywhere.
So I think we can tag team on this one, Martin.
Great.
So many of you on the call today are affiliated with one of LCV's state affiliates. And so you have leaders, right? Leaders who are going on grassroots lobbying visits, leaders who are helping talk to voters about candidates or ballot measures, or who are serving on your boards. So you have a base already to start thinking about who among who's already in our orbit, right, that we should be talking to about running for office. And then Martin, I don't know if you wanted to talk about any of these other sources.
Absolutely, right. So if you're just starting off doing candidate recruitment, organizations like these or places like these are really going to have some low-hanging fruit for you in terms of people who have already sort of self-selected into and civically engaging in some way, right? Whether they're a volunteer or they hold a leadership position in some group or organization, they've already said, hey, I'm willing to spend my time doing this, right? So you may want to look there first to say, is there anybody here that I think would be a great city council person, school board member, state legislator, right? If you are sort of getting a little bit more advanced in your place, right, you may look outside of these places too, because again, you can find leaders in all kinds of different places that don't necessarily have to fit within the political arena or the political realm, right? We can train you on how to be a good candidate, and we can get you policy information. But if you bring in what Shanti talked about earlier in terms of that work ethic and that passion and that drive to benefit your community, that's what you're really looking for. But these are some really great places to start out and to build relationship with, because these folks are also going to have networks of folks to tap into as well.
And then you can also hold a search party in your community. And I have a whole kind of little flyer on this. So if you're interested, I'll drop my email in the chat. Oh, actually, you'll see it at the end. But if you want to just know more about what this would look like, but generally exactly, Eddie's saying, you never know where a leader is. You can, you could basically choose somebody in your community who is really well networked, whose values you trust, right? Not just anybody, but somebody whose values you're aligned with. And you basically are you're asking them to open up their Rolodex and invite people in their community who care about, recruiting somebody strong for a particular seat. And then you just get as many people in the room as you can, people who share your values again. And you talk about, what does the person in this role need to be like? What qualities are we looking for? What does the role involve? What's the time commitment? And then you brainstorm and then you decide who's going to go talk to who. But again, I can share more about that if you are really interested in the idea of holding a search party in your community. But the idea also with the search party is not just to brainstorm people, but hopefully you're building buy-in as a community about, trying to get on the same page about what kind of person you're looking for. And hopefully once you choose somebody, then people are sort of more invested in helping that person be successful. All right, next slide. So after you identify a good candidate, we want to help them, right? We want to help them help them meet donors. We want to help them get endorsements. We want to help them with field. We want to help them find mentors and staff and volunteers, and then figure out what else they need and try to help them get it. But again, be honest, right, about what you can offer. And I'll just share that from my perspective, running for school board, staff is often the hardest thing for people at lower level offices. It's not, it's always staff, I think is always difficult actually, because we typically don't have enough money to pay people a really good wage for the difficulty of the work, the long hours, the skill that's involved in running a good campaign. But in particular, if you can help them, I would say at lower level offices with finding staff, I would say that is the best value, one of the biggest value adds that we can add, because it's just really hard to find people who are willing to work for a fixed period of time, for not very much money, for super insane hours. And yeah, so anyway, I would say that's one of the biggest value adds. I think if you can help with that, and finding mentors, that's a big value add. I don't know, Martina, if you want to add anything else on this one.
I think you're totally right on the staffing piece. And I think you all as organizations have memberships and are associated with other organizations and understand like where trainings are and pieces like that. So they may come in being like, I don't know anything about this space, but you come in being like, I have networks of folks who are not candidates and who could be campaign staff. And so how do you connect them there, or ensure that you're talking to them about what are the qualities they're looking for and the characteristics they're looking for in staff, and not necessarily maybe the experience, particularly if they're running in a crowded race or in an election, a high, like a presidential election year, right? And thinking about, you need somebody who's organized, you need somebody who's committed, right? You need somebody who is a good communicator. Those are qualities you can find with somebody who maybe hasn't run a city council race before or hasn't run a state legislative race before, right? But thinking about qualities and characteristics over somebody who has run my type of campaign in my city with my type of candidacy and background, right? You start
Speaks
to
the language of the voters, you know?
exactly, you start to get in unicorn land, and then it gets it gets even more difficult to find staff.
Yeah.
Next slide.
All right, next slide. So I think this one is you, Martin.
Yeah, and so again, we talked about mentoring, right? And how do you get them to feel comfortable again with running for office, but supporting them by building out those close relationships. What does it look like for you to introduce them to folks who may be political influencers within the space, or somebody who has held that elective office before, for them to get a sense of what does it actually look like to be in that position? Very often, particularly for communities of color, fundraising is really difficult, or they may see fundraising as much more difficult, and we usually have to outraise and out campaign our white counterparts. And so we always have to look at, how are we supporting these candidates with trainings, with budgeting on how to build power, on how to have a good one-on-one conversation, how to cultivate donors, right? How to make a fundraising ask. How are we giving them the tools to be successful, and ensuring that we're aligning them with people who also align with your values and their values, to show that it is possible, right? To show that an AOC, right, who used to work in the service industry, is now in Congress, and how that was possible for her to build that infrastructure and really look at the tools that were needed in order to do that. I think it's really critical that as you are supporting winning candidates, how are we continuing to provide them with any sort of training or other support that is needed? Because what we don't want to do is them to get discouraged because they feel like they failed at it. And quite frankly, a lot of first-time candidates don't win, particularly if they're running in partisan primaries and it's a crowded race, right? There's only one winner if there's 7 candidates, right? 6 people lost that race. And so you have to be thinking about, how do you tell them that they are continuing to build a brand and a name recognition and get experience, so that next time around they run actually an even better campaign, right? So, but we're not sort of framing it in this like, you failed because you lost. No, you had a lot of growth there, and this is what that means for them.
And then I would just add, we just wrapped up in Vermont. We did a training with Vermont conservation voters for their newly elected state legislature, members of the state legislature. And it was such a cool experience to have them be in this training space together over several weeks, get to know each other, understand each other's policy priorities, understand each other's values. And we believe the theory of change is that by building those trusting relationships among them, that they're going to be able to work closely together in the legislature and move a shared vision, right? Have a shared vision around criminal justice reform, around more care for, children, for the elderly, and the other things that they care about. So whatever you can do to support them, support your newly elected officials, to build those relationships with each other, to have a shared vision of the change that they're trying to move in their community. Those are great things. And Sheldon from the Vermont Conservation Voters is on here today. So some of you will get to talk to her in small groups. So, but I hope other state leagues will also think about doing that. And that's something we can help support with. We believe that governance training is a really important investment, because we spend a lot of time and money and staff time supporting these candidates. Like, let's help them be effective, right, once they get elected. Next slide. Okay. So we want to give you guys some time together. And so here's your assignment and your pair. You guys are going to have about 5-6 minutes in pair shares. And so we want you to think about a candidate recruitment experience. It could be positive or it could be negative, right? That you have gone through. What's your analysis of why the candidate decided to run or not? What supports were you able to offer them? And then how did their candidacy, if they ended up running, or their election, pay off for your organization? And so, Martina, I don't know if you want to add anything on what we hope these pair shares will do.
I think just taking 3 minutes each to both to be able to share your thoughts on this. I will quickly post these into the chat box so that everybody has them as they're in their breakout groups. That's all I have.
And then when we come back together, we're going to have time for some Q&A. I see people dropping off. Maybe they don't want to be on camera in a fair share. But we hope that, so Andrea, feel free if you don't want to go into a small group, that's okay. Oh, you're saying you're a candidate. That's okay. I hope that you'll, just participate in the pair share and you can just share that you're not so recruiting candidates. Yeah, so let's go ahead and get in we'll just do 5 minutes, 5 or 6 minutes. And when you come back, we're gonna have time for Q&A. So see you in a few. Hi, everybody, welcome back. I think we just have a couple more slides and then we want to have time for Q&A. I think somebody asked in the chat before we left, how did I get recruited? I recruited myself, Risa, but that's very rare. Most people need to be asked.
Also kind of, sorry to jump in, I kind of actually meant that for the person who was saying that they're a candidate. That they're not here, to learn to recruit themselves.
Yeah, let's see if they're still here. Who is that person?
I can answer that. So it's me. It was me. So my mom actually, I was talking to her, and she said, Andrea, you have two options. You can either get up and run for office, or you can sit down and be quiet, because I'm tired of hearing that the school board is not doing anything. If you want change, you have to enact change. So there you have it.
A little bit of tough love, huh?
I like your mom already.
So we just have a couple more slides here, and then we want to take a Q&A from you all. I don't know, Tom, if we can, there we go. So let's see here, some pro tips for you all. It always takes longer than you think it will. I don't know why, but my experience has been that candidates it takes them a long time to get going once they decide that they're all in. And so, somebody was saying in my breakout that it takes, they need about a year for the campaign. So you have to backward map from there. You got to get them, if they're running November of next year, they need to really be clear that they're running by December of this year. But yeah, the recruitment process just takes a lot longer than you think it will. Local connections and trust are key. And so, maintaining those relationships you have in your community, and, having trusting relationships with people so that people feel good that if you are recruiting candidates, that they're going to be people that they will feel comfortable with supporting. Partner wherever you can, and then just try it, right? You're going to learn a lot from your first efforts in candidate recruitment. And then I don't know, Martina, if you have any other pro tips that you want to chime in with.
Just do it.
Yep, just try it. And you're going to learn from it. Okay, next
Absolutely.
slide. Oh, right. So we want to give you homework assignment. Let's come back to this.
Yeah, let's go to questions.
Yeah, let's go to questions. So you can either drop them in the chat or just come off mute.
Questions you have about starting, challenges you see or think you're going to face in this?
I'd like to pose a question, and that would be, what would be your suggested lead time for voter engagement regardless of race, granted, the position itself has a range of population based on what the seat is for, but nonetheless, can you weigh in more on voter engagement and what would be a healthy lead time for a candidate of a general race to begin voter engagement?
Absolutely. I think as you're thinking about a race, right, what you want to think about more so is how many votes do you need to win? Because that's going to help determine how much time is it going to take to talk to all of those voters, right? Because if you're running in a race that you need 5,000 votes, you may need 6 months, right, to make sure that you communicate with all of those voters, whether it's on a phone, eventually, right, we're going to be back door knocking, whether it's on Zoom meet and greets, right, however it is, you're going to be communicating with them. If you're running in a race where you're talking to millions of people, right, you may need 1.5 years, 2 years, right, to think about what does it look like for me to raise the resources I need, build the team that I need, and then communicate to voters. And so really be thinking more so about how many votes do I need to win, and then planning backwards to say, great, now how long do I think it's going to take for me to talk to all of those targeted voters? Is that helpful? I know there's not a sort of silver bullet for every race, but it's really thinking backwards of how long will it take for me to communicate to all the people that I need to talk to.
And if you are not going to have the same resources that your opponent has for mail and for TV or whatever else, then you need to start earlier than them. I knew that I was going to be running against a better financed opponent, but I started door knocking in April, and they really weren't out anywhere until July or August. And so I had already talked to thousands, I had already committed thousands of voters before they were even out talking to voters. And so typically we're not going to have the same resources as progressives that our opponents will have. And so it's really important that we get started early. And the other advantage of starting early is that you get to tell your story about who you are before anyone else defines you, right? Or tells the story about who you are. So AOC started knocking 2 years, right, before the election. And she did that because she knew she wasn't going to have the same resources. And it worked for her. But a lot of times voters are going to be confused if you're out there 2 years before the election, but it worked for her. So you can't argue with that.
Absolutely. And I think if you bring up a good point, Shanti, in terms of budget, which is often a question folks ask, right, is like, well, how much do I need to raise? Somebody put in the chat, I look at Ballotpedia, great resource, right, to go look to be like how much money was spent previously. But you also want to think about, right, when you think about budget, you should think about time, money, and people, right? Because if you have a lot of money, you may need less time or less people. But if you don't have a lot of money, you might need more time and more people, right? And so how do you work with those three things to really look holistically at a budget?
I appreciate that feedback, and I have my own familiarity with political campaign management, and I'm very much a proponent for voter engagement. I'm not very much for the mailers. I'm not phone banking, yes, but then there's a method to that voter engagement strategy that I very highly encourage the voter engagement, and to also not waste so much on prior year election turnouts, because I would encourage any candidate I would be supporting to exceed any standard threshold, to hold reverence to that representative position they are seeking, and to value every voter, to value every individual, and especially the turning 18 population. I think there can be a lot more engagement and involvement with high school turning of age students to really get them onto that life of civic engagement. That it can only take that one candidate to have that one opportunity for that one individual to just be life-changing. So thank you for sharing your perspective. I just wanted to encourage that voter engagement and not get overwhelmed with numbers or money when you believe in what you are doing and what you are intending to do. And there's people like us out here to support you. So thank you.
Thank you, Armando. Certainly the gold standard is the door knocking face-to-face conversation with voters. But you still need the mail. My opinion is you still need the mail, because even if you knock on every single door in your district, which we did multiple times in some cases, there are people who won't answer the door, right? They're afraid of randos knocking on their door, or they're not at home, right? And so that's why you need the multiple methods, right? Some people aren't on Facebook, so so the Facebook ads aren't going to work. Some people don't read campaign mail, so the mail is not going to work, but they will have a conversation with you if you come to their door or if you call them on the phone. And so that's why you need those multiple channels. Anything else, Martin, before we take I see we got a couple hands.
No, go for it.
All right, how about Sky and then Eddie?
Thanks so much. Hi there. I'm just asking from an organizational perspective, how do you prepare to support candidates? Sometimes, you have a bunch of other programs and stuff going on as an organization, and you get caught up, and then the election comes and you're like, but I have to do the field stuff. I don't know how to support you with the other stuff. So how would you, as organizational staff, prepare to have time to support more than just the campaign that like you're getting paid for, but to support them in a flexible way? Hopefully that makes sense.
Yeah, I can jump in. So I think as an organization, you need to do an internal assessment to be like, here's what we can offer. Maybe it's volunteers, maybe it's boots on the ground, maybe it's a check, right? Maybe it's an endorsement or relationship communication, right? Like networking. You figure out for yourself, here are the things that we can offer campaigns, and here's the lane that we fall into, so that when you are having these conversations, the candidate's not anticipating that, well, I talked to Sky and Sky said that they're gonna put all this money in and all these people in, and they're gonna run my campaign for me. That's what you don't want, right? We want to make sure that we're being honest with them about what we actually can do. And then that frees you up to say, well, we're recruiting these candidates, well, we're able to help them in this place. But what you can do as an organization is figure out who are the other players that could offer some of that other additional support. So it's not necessarily has to fall on you, but at least you're making the connection, and you are right. You're sort of sending them over to Shanti, or you're sending them over to another group or organization who may be able to do some of the other pieces that you all maybe don't have the capacity for. It's not to sort of overwhelm you with all of these responsibilities now, but as an organization who's involved in this space, you should know where to at least point people.
Yeah, and it's complicated by people's different tax statuses, right? Some of the organizations who do a ton of base building here in Oakland are C3 organizations. And they don't have PACs. And so it's all about volunteers, right? They can help recruit volunteers as volunteers. They cannot do that as part of their organizational mission. And then there's organizations that are C4, and so they can actually support candidates. And then there are organizations that have PACs, and then they can do everything, right? And so, yes, I would just second what Martin said, is like understanding everybody's different capacities and the ways that they can support, and maintaining those relationships year round, so that it's not just like, we have these people, can you guys, yeah, so. And then I know we have some other experts on here, so I hope folks will chime in the chat about other ways that their organizations, but I would say some organizations just staff up. They hire people Labor Day through November, and the whole reason they plan for that, right? They budget for it, and then they have people who come on just to be able to do that. Eddie, you're up.
Thank you. I almost call you school board member, then I realized we're not in a school board meeting and I don't have to do that. But school board member Gonzalez, thank you very much for allowing me the time. And Martin, thank you very much. I guess one of the things that I've seen on a lot of campaigns that I've either run or run IEs for is that folks think, candidates think that they are unbeatable from day one. I am the best candidate for this seat, and why is the other candidate even running, right? And I think Shanti, you and I saw it, in Oakland, on this last race, a couple races. I guess that's the biggest thing that I always to candidates don't believe your own headlines, because all the Facebook posts and all the Twitter posts of how great you are great, but they don't get you any votes, right? And I think that's the biggest thing. You always have to smell the neighborhood and to smell if your message is running correctly. I think that's the biggest thing that that I've always kind of seen in whatever race that I've worked on either the IE side or the regular side, is that, is the message actually correlating with what we're trying to accomplish? Because if I'm going to the door, and I'll just give you an example. If I always audit data. I always have somebody on our staff or myself auditing door data, right? and I'll randomly pick a voter who said, I knocked on so-and-so's door, right? Door A. Okay, great. I'm just gonna randomly call that person. Hey, this is Eddie Alvarez from the so-and-so campaign. Did volunteer A knock on your door today? No, they did not knock on my door today. Great. Thank you very much. I apologize for wasting your time, and I'll talk to you later. That tells me everything I want to know right there. Your volunteers not giving you true data, and you need to have a conversation with that volunteer or staff member. I've had it with staff, right? And then if they say yes, say, well, tell me, would you feel okay telling me about that conversation, right? Because then you realize, is the conversation actually going there? And right there, we're doing our own polling, right? I think that's the biggest thing is, are these things working? And I know sometimes that takes a lot of time, but it's been the most valuable, auditing what we're doing as a campaign. Is it really working? And auditing the actual numbers of what the pollster's telling us, if you have enough money to run a poll, and what, feedback from staff, because for you that are going to run, staff is going to lie to you. Just telling you right now, staff can lie to you once in a while to make you feel a little better that day. But because I've done it. Sorry, I've done it. Don't tell my boss that. It's going great. Great event today. But I just, that's what I kind of wanted to add is this: you got to be honest with yourself on the campaign. We talked about that here a little bit. I think Berto Martin talked about that. You got to be honest with yourself, and with everything that we do, because the minute you start listening to your own headlines and you start reading your own Facebook posts of how great of a person you are, your campaign's over. You're gonna lose. And if you win, good luck, because I mean that. It's just like being honest with ourselves with anything else in our life, right? We have to be honest with our campaign, ask tough questions, because if you have a consultant, and I don't want to go too far, and I apologize, but if you have a consultant, if they're not asking you tough questions, and you aren't asking them tough questions, you're gonna have a rough day. So that's what I'll say, and I thank you for Shanti for letting me rant for a minute.
Thanks, Eddie. I think Cesar, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I think you answer part of my question, but if you can add a little bit more, that'd be great. So is there anything, whatever you can feel comfortable sharing, is there anything you guys are doing in terms of partnering with endorsements? So whenever you are elected, you don't have tight hands, and you are free to do things that you really want to do, that align with your values, your beliefs, and your pledges to the community, not a transactional thing.
Yeah, I mean, every candidate, I would say, has a different approach to this. For me, I did not accept money from any organizations that I didn't feel aligned with their values or their, whatever they were hoping was going to happen if I was elected. But every candidate has a different, approach to that. Some people are like, hey, if I can't do anything for anybody unless I get elected, so all comers are welcome, but that's a tough question, right? The way that our system is set up, it's hard if you don't have your own independent wealth. It's just really hard to get elected. And so it's a kind of a crappy situation. And, I hope that we change that. I want us to have publicly funded campaigns or some other system. But yeah, I don't know, Martin, if you want to add anything to that.
No, I think you covered it there in terms of it can be a rough journey, but it is possible, right? And it is possible to do the work, and it is possible to raise the money. We've seen it time and time again, right? If the person is willing to go in and do the work, right, we can get them to a place where they see the other side of election day, in whatever governing body that looks like. I think to what Eddie said, I totally co-sign there, right? And I will say it does take a little bit of ego to run for office, but I think even if they are the best candidate in the race, we have seen that sometimes our former president, the best candidate, doesn't often win, or sometimes doesn't win, and we know who the best candidate is, right? So I think you're absolutely right. Letting folks know that if they're sort of drinking their own Kool-Aid, that a little bit of a reality check in terms of, just because you may be the smartest, most qualified, best candidate for the race, sometimes it doesn't go in our favor.
Well, we are at time, folks. I'm really appreciative of everybody who showed up today. And then I think if we could show that last slide before we sign off here. Thank you all. It was great to have this time to talk with you. We want to give you just a little homework assignment if you're open. We want you to identify somebody in your community that should be asked to run for office. You don't even have to know which office right now, but we want you to just think about who is somebody in my community that's like an exceptional leader and really should be serving in some kind of formal leadership role. Who should approach them, right? Who's the best person to approach them about running for office? What might be persuasive to them? What kinds of supports? And then training. Is there a specific LCV? What are the training resources available in your community? And always I'm open as a thought partner about how we can make sure that they get good training. So please consider thinking about this just as you're starting your work on candidate recruitment. And I think we have one last slide. I think we already dropped our contact information into the chat, but there it is. Feel free to reach out anytime. And I really appreciate you, Martin and Tom from the Campaigns Workshop for doing this with me. And hopefully folks are participating in other Latino Advocacy Week activities. But good to see you all, and thanks for the time.